Are you listening? Damn. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And welcome into another episode of the Damn Podcast here on the 24/7 Sports Podcast Network and powered by BeaverBlitz.com. I'm your host, Carter Bahns, joined as always by BeaverBlitz.com publisher Angie Machado, who is with me here on this Tuesday, December 13th at 5 p.m. We're live on YouTube, and you can find us anywhere on your favorite podcast app. Angie, thanks for joining me as we have all sorts of stuff to recap from the last week of news in Corvallis. A new contract for head coach Jonathan Smith, all sorts of performance awards at the conference and national level. Of course, personnel-wise, the month of December is always busy with NFL draft announcements, the transfer portal, the early signing period. We're going to talk about all of that and much more and hopefully get to some damn questions at the end if we have time. Angie, unfortunately, we are the not necessarily the bearers of the news, but we are going to discuss a little bit here at the beginning of the show some of the more somber news of the day as Mississippi State head coach and former Washington State head coach Mike Leach has passed away at the age of 61 from complications related to a heart condition. Angie, obviously just terrible news that we both woke up to this morning from Mississippi. With regards to a coach that we have all sorts of respect for, that we have enjoyed our time covering from his time in the Pac-12, and obviously, anytime Mike Leach shows up in the news, it's worth watching and listening to. So Angie, let's start this podcast by getting your thoughts on the legacy that Coach Mike Leach leaves behind.
Yeah, I mean, first, not that anyone's watching, but my heart goes out and my thoughts go out to his family. And then I think what we're all forgetting too is his players, his current team, former team. I saw a very poignant Instagram post today from Helinski's Hope, talking about just how close he was with Tyler, and it was a must read. It was very poignant how they are up talking football, Tyler and Coach Leach now up in heaven. So he is a gem. Talk about someone who, like you said, I could listen to him ramble for an hour. I mean, and had such interesting takes on things, and he could get you on the edge of your seat talking anything from candy corn and spree candy to the merits of marriage and how to maneuver an engagement. Yeah, just a complete gem. And then just hearing the stories that are coming out about what a kind and great person he was. So I've been spending some time over at the our sister site, Gene's Pages, the Mississippi State 24/7 site, and Steve Robertson, one of their writers, has covered now Coach Leach for a couple years and became friends with him through that. I mean, Carter, think about it. You spend a lot of time covering these guys, and you do become friends. But he recapped one evening they were sitting there and they heard noise out in the practice field, and they look out and there's a group of students playing on the practice field, and Steve looks at him and says, "Aren't you going to do anything?" And because he goes, Dan Mullins, the previous coach, would have gone bonkers, got those kids off. And he goes, "Why? They're breaking in the field for me and they're having fun. They'll remember this night for the rest of their lives." And just that kind of person. So my thoughts go out to them and to the family and everyone touched. But he touched a lot of lives and bigger than life.
Absolutely. Mike Leach, always a class act. During his time at Washington State. And of course, Oregon State fans grew to dislike what his teams did to the Beavers. But it was always fun watching him on the sidelines and, perusing his media availabilities and listening to some of the gems that came from some of those. Mike Leach, an innovator on the field and just a true great, unique personality off of it as well. And one that we will dearly miss, and I think the sport of college football and really the sporting world will miss, because there never was and probably never will be another Mike Leach out there.
Yeah, just like I said, the intelligence to, have a law degree, but then all the extra stuff he studied. I mean, he'd start talking Bigfoot and then Geronimo and then the pirate swinging the sword. And just like you said, a very unique individual, but one that has touched not just college football, has touched, I think, like you said, the entire sporting world, and definitely one that will be rich. My kids even would, anytime they'd hear Mike Leach's voice, if I was watching one of his sound clips, they'd come running because like, what is he going to say now? So touched even young sports fans. I'm just,
Angie,
what I'm kicking myself about, I didn't know we had a Cameo account. Oh my God. I should have done a Cameo. That would have been pure gold.
Angie, I remember the two of us were driving back from, I want to say it was a fall camp practice this summer in August. And I downloaded or, YouTubed a highlight reel of some of Mike Leach's greatest press conference moments. And we listened to that for about 15 minutes on our way back from Corvallis.
Because he's out of the Pac-12 3 years, Carter. And we were still talking about how we missed Mike Leach.
Yeah.
And
we will obviously continue to miss him. If you want to go back and look at some of those highlight reels, they're all over the place today. Some of his greatest hits. My favorite probably still is the Pac-12 mascot battle.
Yes. Beaver. I don't know if they can hold their breath that long.
From seeing how long the Beaver can hold its breath to what kind of mystical powers the Sun Devil has, that is probably the best 2 to 3 minutes of college football press conference you will ever
candy
find.
Corn. I mean, it's horrible, and that's why it only has one holiday.
Incredible stuff. Mike Leach, of course, changed the game of football with his air raid scheme as an offensive coordinator at Kentucky, and then, as a head coach at Texas Tech, and then Washington State, and then ultimately Mississippi State. The way that his teams played offense, man, like I said, Oregon State fans terrorized by it. That is an offense that revolutionized the game. And now you see elements of the air raid at essentially every level of football, whether that's high school, college, and even into the pros. Mike Leach's impact as an offensive mastermind and an innovator is felt across the entire sport.
And Carter, how amazing is it that he never played football? He went to BYU, played rugby. I was reading today that he played rugby but loved football and would just go and talk football with Lavelle Edwards, the great BYU coach. Lavelle let him hang around and just kind of soak up the knowledge. And, here he is learning, watching Steve Young or Jim McMahon. And that's kind of where all this went. I mean, in his head, just kind of a savant when it came to the football offenses.
An incredible coach and an incredible person for sure. Mike Leach will be missed. His family and everyone in that Mississippi State community definitely in our thoughts today. This is an Oregon State podcast, of course, and we have plenty of Oregon State related content to touch on here. This being the Tuesday of game week, actually. Oregon State playing in the Las Vegas Bowl on Saturday at Allegiant Stadium against Florida. BeaverBlitz.com has all sorts of preview content coming up. I just finished our first matchup preview of the week that will go live Wednesday morning on the site. Staff picks, the whole 9 yards, behind enemy lines, all of the stuff that we normally run throughout game week will be live on the site throughout the week. And then Angie and I, actually the whole Machado gang and I, will be in Las Vegas very late Wednesday night into Thursday morning, and we'll be there to cover all of the action for a couple of days. So be sure to stick with us because bowl content is coming, I promise. We didn't have much availability and we didn't really know our schedule until early in the week. But now that we have it all locked down, that stuff is coming. I can guarantee it. So a lot of the news that we have to cover here is actually related to what has transpired over the last, 10 days or so since we recorded our last podcast.
It's been wild.
One of those, it has been a while. Promise we are not going to go that long without recording another one. We'll be back either to preview the game or to recap it within the next week. But on Sunday, now about 48 hours previous to when we're recording this, the biggest news I think of the last week and a half was Jonathan Smith's new contract announcement, and not only Jonathan Smith, but the additions to the assistant coaching salary pool, the support staff salary pool. Angie, just here, I'll go through some of the details and then I'll get your thoughts on it. We'll start with Jonathan Smith, who gets a new 6-year, $30.6 million deal with an annual guarantee of $4.85 million starting this spring.
It's almost like our BeaverBlitz contract, right, Carter?
Pretty close. Right? It's right up there. That number will increase by $100,000 every year, up to a final annual salary of $5.35 million. That runs through February 28th, 2029. So Jonathan Smith locked up almost through the entire decade here at Oregon State.
Huge. Oregon State went all in on Coach Smith. I mean, he is now in the top half of Pac-12 coaches' salaries. Yeah, I mean, and then I do want to make a point, because I've seen this all over social media. No state funds and no tuition increases are going, or tuition dollars are going to fund these. So I just want to make that clear, because there were a lot of people out there worried that their taxes or their tuition was going to go up to pay for this. But huge commitment, just a great, and I think it's earned. And I was the first, like I said, we've had a couple things looking back at the hiring of Jonathan Smith 5 years ago. I do think, Oregon State did it the way: hire Jonathan Smith, a young, inexperienced, no head coaching experience coach, bring him in kind of on the lower end, and then he's earned everything he's gotten now. But I know if you were to ask Jonathan, assistant coaching pool is going to be in his support staff. It's going to be very important, because those guys aren't making millions and millions of dollars. So to keep them happy, because he's only as successful as those guys that he has around him.
And the guys that he does have around him have been there for so long now, that you've seen Jonathan Smith retain most of his staff. A lot of those guys have been absolutely integral in building this program and developing the talent. And you see them rewarded with a new assistant coaching salary pool that increases to $4.85 million as well. So matching Smith's contract. And then the support staff pool. This includes, I assume, your recruiting staff, your equipment guys, and everybody else within that program. That will increase to $2.5 million, and both of those will see annual increases of at least $100,000. So as Smith continues to see his salary boost up every year, so will his assistants, and I think that's a key thing to note as well.
It is key, and that's honestly where we can talk about where Smith's success is coming from, is that continuity that he's had retaining coaches. And, I was down in Corvallis on Friday when we spoke to Brian Lindgren and Coach Bray, and Coach Bray actually has signed a new deal before that with a raise. And somebody asked him about his next step being a head coach, and Trent kind of laughed, and he's like, I don't want to be a head coach, at least right now. And he goes, I'm not motivated by money. I'm making plenty. I'm quality of life and success is what drives me. And I'm getting both of that here. So I think there is a element to that, and I don't think other teams in the Pac-12 or around the country even kind of come close to realizing, is how much these guys really do enjoy working at Oregon State, coaching at Oregon State, and then seeing that success that they've had over the past 5 years.
Yeah, and speaking of that Trent Bray extension and raise, I haven't crunched the numbers on this, but I do think that there is an element of the assistant coaching salary pool increasing to accommodate that. And so, you see that number increase now. A lot of that is going to Trent Bray to keep him around. But the key there is that the pool continues to increase year over year, which allows for Smith to hand out raises where they're deserved. And really every year for the last, 3 or 4 years, we have seen raises go out, and those assistants have made more and more money per year as they've continued to win more and more games. But I don't think any of those contract extensions or raises on the assistant staff have been more important than the one that Trent Bray received this year.
Absolutely. Absolutely. What he has done in a year's time with the same personnel that Tim Tibesar had is nothing short of remarkable. I mean, and it bothers me that he wasn't a finalist for the Broyles Trophy, and we'll talk about that. He was a nominee, but looking at where that group was a year ago to where it is now is night and day different.
Let's talk, Angie, about the commitment to success that I think this is kind of indicative of. A financial commitment at Oregon State to winning football games that maybe 5 years ago, I think fans were calling into question. This is pre Jonathan Smith winning a bunch of games. This is pre Reser Stadium construction announcement. This is at a time where the football program is at an all-time low. And I think a lot of fans, and you and I sat here as well talking about, man, is Oregon State really committed to winning? And the only thing that we have seen from this athletic department over the last couple of years is sustained growth on the field, financial investments into the Sports Performance Center, Reser Stadium, the Valley Football Center, investments continued into the coaching staff to increase their salaries and extend their contracts. How much more confident are you today than you were maybe 2, 3, 4 years ago in Oregon State's commitment to winning football games?
Oh, I think Scott Bahns now has finally, kind of jumped all in and realized that football is the one key that drives the bus for the entire athletic department. And he has a coach now that he can get behind. The fans are behind, has taken them to almost a 10-win season. We're a game away from a 10-win season, only the third time ever if that happens on Saturday. So, it's good to see. It feels like the athletic department is in good footing. Now, especially, even think, Carter, to the beginning of the year when all the uncertainty about the Pac-12 with USC and UCLA leaving the conference, there was talk that, Washington State and Oregon State will be lucky to end up in the Mountain West if they dissolve. Oregon State's doing a lot to position itself as a school that's not in that bottom rung, with coaching salaries, with winning games, with recruiting, with retention of both coaches, but also players. To see the lack of, and we'll see more guys go in the portal after the Vegas Bowl. I'm sure they all want their swag bags and everything else, but I was talking to someone today from another Pac-12 school 24/7 site and talking about the culture and how it's changed and that's what he was saying. He goes, Oregon State doesn't have anybody in the portal. These are the type of kids that now these other schools are going to want to look to poach because they have experience and they feel like they can poach guys, but Oregon State guys are staying, they're staying put. And that is where I think Oregon State is going to start, they direct those NIL dollars, and that's a whole nother conversation. But it is remarkable at just how much they've really positioned themselves. But I think it's really important, again, with the timing of it all, Carter, with potential realignment and to make our, you can't change how many people live in Corvallis or what the TV footprint is. You can't. It is what it is, but you can change your commitment to salaries, to winning, and to all the other things that you actually can control.
That's completely spot on. And actually a point that I made yesterday as a guest on the Locked On Pac-12 podcast. If you don't listen to that, you definitely should. Spencer does a great job over there and brings me on from time to time. It's basically the exact same point I made on there about 24 hours ago. And that episode will air on Friday, actually. In that, Angie, you and I sat here this summer and talked about, man, Oregon State to the Mountain West, Oregon State to, John Wilner's throwing out Oregon State to the Big Sky, which we knew would never happen. But like, it was a legitimate thought that a journalist had and published and tweeted. And,
which shocks me.
I know. We're having these doom and gloom conversations for a couple of months. And, we both sat here and said, the only thing that Oregon State can control is itself. It can't control Corvallis. It can't control the Pac-12. It can't control the Big Ten coming in and poaching these schools. The only thing the Beavers can do is on the field, you have to win games, get yourself into the national limelight, and the Beavers have done nothing short of that. Now ranking in the top 15, winning 9 games, going and playing an SEC opponent on ESPN in a bowl game.
With Kirk Herbstreit and Pat McAfee calling the game. So
yeah, exactly. Oregon State putting itself in the national limelight there, but then also at a university and athletic department level, financially committing to your coaches, rebuilding the stadium, all of these things that indicate that you're committed to winning and committed to playing at the highest level. These are all of the things that Oregon State had to do on its end to ensure that it's positioning itself in the best way possible in this new era of college football and the new era of the Pac-12 and, whatever this conference turns out to be. I sit here now 6 months after the announcement that USC and UCLA are going to leave the Pac-12. And I say Oregon State is in a far better position than it was back on June 30th.
Absolutely. I see Harold Killeen over in comments just wants to know where the new president stands toward athletics. We have not spoken with her. I have spoken to a few professors that have, heard her speak. And all I can go off of is what I've seen on social media. And she's always, talking about backing the football team, is talking about the football team, going to the games. She has to be happy with what she is seeing from that standpoint, as far as crazy crowds, a lot of engagement, full stadium, full half a stadium. That has to make a president happy.
Couldn't agree more. I think that the coaching contracts, again, are just kind of another feather in the cap of the Oregon State Athletic Department right now. And I know Jonathan Smith is excited for the future, and we certainly are as well, to see what he can do now that he's locked up for like 6 more years now. That is a 6-year, $30.6 million deal. Again, almost rivals what Angie and I make at BeaverBlitz.
Almost.
He will get there one day. He will get there one day, and maybe he won't have to run the clock at Boys and Girls Clubs basketball games if he eventually reaches our level of fame. Status.
Okay, that's totally going off our script here, but that tweet, it was Stan Highway 20 Beaver tweeted it, and I had to retweet it. It got more likes than any tweet I've ever had. But Jonathan Smith, and I've seen him so his oldest son is the same age as my son, and they've played against each other baseball games and things over the years, baseball tournaments. But he was at the Boys and Girls Club running the clock for his daughter's basketball game. Totally just no Beaver gear, just running the clock. And I've done that at basketball games, Carter. I'm sure you have too. It is stressful because you have dads yelling at you to stop the clock or put the score up.
Yeah, it's got to be as stressful as some of the things he does on the football field.
Yes.
But he's not making $4.85 million to run the clock. So again, just, it speaks to the humility, the humble nature of Jonathan Smith. And man, how often do we talk about how that bleeds into the culture of the Oregon State football program? All right. No, we'll hit the break after this. Okay. I want to talk about some of the awards and honors that the Oregon State football program and some of the individuals within it have received over the last week. And then we'll go to a break after that. This is a very long list that we're just kind of going to weed through a little bit. I mean, I'm sitting here with almost 2 pages of awards on my screen, something that Angie would have taken us, I don't know, maybe 30 seconds a year or 2 ago, 3 years ago to run through all of these things. But no, again, a testament to what Oregon State has done on the field, how much this program has built itself to get to a point where you have all of these awards. And let's run through a few of them. So just to perspective, in 2018, Coach Smith's very first full season, Oregon State had 2 all Pac-12 honorable mentions. That's it. Mm-hmm. This year, there were 19. 19 in total, including a handful of honorable mentions there as well. 5 first teamers. Incredible stuff. But let's start with the national awards. And the first one is technically a regional award, but it comes from a national organization here. As Jonathan Smith is named the AFCA FBS Region 5 Coach of the Year. And, I didn't look up a region map of the AFCA, but I believe that includes everything west of the Rocky Mountains.
Yeah, I believe so.
You're competing against the Mountain West essentially, and I think potentially part of the Big 12. I'm not entirely sure on the map of that, but Jonathan Smith, the Region 5 Coach of the Year, and that is an award you'll see pop up in just a minute when we talk about the All-Conference Awards. But the other national award winner, of course, is Jack Coletto, the Jack Hammer, winning the Paul Hornung Award, which was made for Jack Coletto. I mean, if Coletto didn't win this year, I think we'd be talking about the integrity of the Hornung Award. Felt like a
Beaver fans maybe
for Jack Coletto.
Yeah, Beaver fans may have taken out pitchforks and stormed the Hornung office, but huge award for him.
It's an award too that you look at some of the past winners: Christian McCaffrey, Saquon Barkley. I mean, these are 2 of the best NFL football players out there right now. And Jack Coletto's on a list with those guys, and I think frankly was more deserving of the award than those guys even. I think he's a more versatile player than a Saquon Barkley or a Christian McCaffrey, because you got to remember those guys didn't play defense.
Yeah. Amazing what the jackhammer has done.
Yeah. Jack Coletto was actually also a semifinalist for the Campbell Trophy, which is it's actually kind of considered the academic Heisman. So something that I don't think really got talked about at all. And I don't even remember getting any releases about this, but Jack Coletto was a semifinalist for that award. Trent Bray, defensive coordinator, was a nominee for the Broyles Award. And that kind of, that starts a list of all of these nominations and watch lists that runs a page long. Oregon State had nominees and watch list award or, watch list guys for the Broyles Award, the Burlsworth Trophy, the AFCA Good Works Team, the Werfel Trophy, the Outland Trophy, the Doak Walker, Polynesian College Football Player of the Year, Remington, Ray Guy, Earl Campbell, Mackey, Nagurski, Bednarik, and Comeback Player of the Year awards. So, I mean, that is a lengthy list.
Like every award.
Yeah. And I know some of those like ask each school to send a representative to be on the watch list, but not all of them. So again, we're not going to go through the whole list there, but if you know what some of those awards stand for, you can imagine who was nominated. We just have to conserve time here because there are so many to run through. And so let's move on to the All-Americans, Angie. And there are a couple of them here. Oregon State with All-Americans from 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 different outlets here.
Well, and I think the big winner is Anthony Gould.
Yeah.
For his
Anthony Gould
returning.
Essentially a consensus first team All-American as a punt returner / kick returner. And it starts with Pro Football Focus naming him a first teamer, Sporting News, CBS Sports, 24/7 Sports, ESPN. That is a lengthy list right there for him. Taliesa Fuaga is also an honorable mention All-American from Pro Football Focus on the offensive line. And then for the freshman awards, Damian Martinez, the running back, freshman All-American first teamer from The Athletic, a third teamer, according to College Football News, and Jack Velling at tight end was actually also an honorable mention All-American per College Football News. And then Damian Martinez, also a true freshman All-American, according to 24/7 Sports. Pretty impressive stuff.
24/7 Sports people know their stuff.
What can we say?
And then the I think those are all awesome. But I think the ones that really, I piqued my interest a little more is the Pac-12 awards, because those are voted on by the coaches. And it was great to see 19 players recognized. 19
players and one coach, mind you.
One coach, yes.
Because Jonathan Smith was named the co-coach of the year by the Pac-12 coaches. He gets that award alongside Washington's Kalen DeBoer. And I think, I don't have any problem with this. I think I would have been perfectly fine with either one of those guys being handed the award. For Kalen DeBoer to go up to Washington in his first year and win 10 games after where that program was over the last couple of years is nothing short of impressive. But Jonathan Smith also very deserving of that award, getting Oregon State to potentially one of its 3 best seasons of all time as a coach after doing that as a player about 20 years ago.
Yeah, and I heard him on John Canzano's show, Coach Smith, and he laughed because he said, I might have won the thing if I hadn't voted for DeBoer.
Because I imagine you cannot vote for yourself.
I bet you can.
Maybe. I don't know.
But let's go first team.
Yeah.
All-purpose, Jack Coletto. Return specialist, Anthony Gould. Running back, Damian Martinez. Linebacker, Omar Spates. And DB, Rajon Wright. All with first team honors. Anybody there that you were surprised with?
No surprises in my book, except Damian Martinez getting a first team nod. The Pac-12 does select 2 first team and 2 second team running backs. So it's not like Damian Martinez eclipsed Zach Charbonnet on that list. He was just named alongside him on the first team. But obviously in a year where there are so many talented running backs, to see a true freshman get on that first team list over a guy like Xavier Valladay at Arizona State and alongside Zach Charbonnet at UCLA, Jaden Ott at California, a couple of those guys at Oregon as well. A very long list of deserving players. And you see the respect go to Damian Martinez there. Moving to the second team, Oregon State had another kick returner on the list as Silas Bolden gets the nod on the second team return specialist. And then you see Taliesa Fuaga defensive back Jaden Grant, and offensive lineman Joshua Gray with the second team award.
And then a ton of honorable mentions.
We'll run through them real quick. Defensive back Alex Austin, Ryan Cooper Jr., Kyrie Fisher-Morris, Trayshawn Harrison, Brandon Kipper, Jake Levengood, Luke Loescher, Sione Lolohea, Katano Ladapo, James Rawls, Simon Sandberg, Riley Sharp, and Corey Stover round out a list of more than I counted before we started this, but I believe 10 honorable mentions for Oregon State.
And how about 4 offensive linemen?
No.
Pretty impressive.
And you probably would have had a 5th if Marco Brewer had stayed healthy and
exactly.
didn't miss the second half of the season. But impressive there. The list voted on by the coaches. It's the lengthiest list, again, in Oregon State football history. The Associated Press also releases a all-conference team. Only one first-teamer there. A little surprising. Katana Ladapo out of the defensive backfield is the lone first-teamer, according to the Associated Press. The second team includes Jack Cleto, Taliesa Fuaga, Jaden Grant, Damian Martinez, Omar Spates, and Rajon Wright.
I know what's interesting is, and I'm all for Catan. I believe he's totally deserving, but he was an honorable mention from the Pac-12 coaches, but then the Associated Press puts him first team.
He was also a first teamer, according to Pro Football Focus, who included Fuaga, Gould, Grant, and Oladapo on their first team All Pac-12 list. The second team included Silas Bolden at kick returner, Joshua Gray on the offensive line, and then Omar Spates at linebacker. And then the third team, Jake Levengood, Damian Martinez, and James Rawls. And that is a long list of performance awards.
But that's awesome. I mean, like I said, like we talked about, look at where this team was in 2018 and look at them now.
Yeah. Anthony Gould joining a pretty elite group of All-Americans at Oregon State. The last one, I believe, being Hamaka Rashid back in 2019 after he, just had that absurd year getting into the backfield and sacking the quarterback at a rate that we hadn't seen at Oregon State. But there have not been many All-Americans at Oregon State since really the Mike Riley era. And Anthony Gould gets there as the nation's most effective punt returner. Anything else you want to add on the honors before we move on to some recruiting, personnel, transfer portal stuff? Because Angie has all sorts of great tidbits there, but I want to give you an opportunity to highlight anything else that we might have missed before we move on and take a quick break.
No, I think it's exciting where Oregon State is, and I want to congratulate all those young men for those big honors. It's huge.
Then with that, we will take a break, but first I have to tell everybody about this deal that we have at BeaverBlitz.com. It's a 50% off annual membership, and it includes a complimentary Paramount Plus subscription. This deal is active across the 24/7 Sports Network, and it's a great one. Angie, I'm sure you use Paramount Plus. I know I do. Any movies that are, from the Paramount Network, most of the things that air on the Paramount Network on TV end up there. Yellowstone is not, but if you want to watch any of the prequels, which I love, those are on Paramount Plus. And then Top Gun Maverick coming very soon.
Maverick's coming. So yes, that one's coming. What I think next week is what I'm hearing. So, Paramount Plus is a fun one. I'm starting tonight the new Sylvester Stallone show. I forget the name of it. Tulsa King. Yes, I've heard it's good. My kids wanted to see it, or my oldest son said that looked interesting. So, we're on it tonight with my Paramount Plus membership.
And again, that is available with this 50% off an annual membership to Beaver Blitz. Not only do you get that Paramount Plus subscription, but you get access to everything Angie and I publish and access to the Lodge at Beaver Blitz, which is the largest message board regarding Oregon State athletics.
And I will say this right now. I see some questions coming up asking about specifics on transfer portal and certain players. I'm not going into detail on the pod. I'm sorry. You got to get to the Lodge if you want to know all the down and dirty and what's going on behind the scenes, because that's where it gets discussed. We'll give a good, maybe a 500-foot level view from in the podcast and everything we do. But all the good stuff gets put in the Lodge. So that's where you want to be, 50% off. I think it's over a $200 value that you get for $53.70, I think is what the math works out with, between your Paramount membership and your Beaver Blitz membership. Do it.
And we will take that 500-foot level view of Oregon State's transfer portal efforts right now.
Okay.
All right. The NFL draft entrants. We're going to start with this
Yes.
before we move into some of the other transfer portal recruiting side, because every year you have a couple of guys who you expect to leave, and they open up some scholarships that maybe you weren't expecting to have. Rajon Wright and Luke Musgrave both have announced their intentions to enter their names in the NFL draft pool. Think we saw both of these coming. Luke Musgrave, that technically did have some eligibility left, but after he missed the final 10 games of the regular season, we kind of assumed that he would move on to the draft, and he made that official about a week ago. There are presumably more to come. Again, a lot of guys who are out of eligibility, who we know won't be on the roster anyway. Some of those guys will declare after the bowl game. Still possible that, some juniors, redshirt sophomores, guys who have been within the program for 3 or more years, still possible that they will declare as well. But Angie, you and I kind of behind the scenes have been talking about maybe some guys we're expecting to come back that, might get a shot in the NFL. Some guys who might come back to add to their resumes a little bit. And one of those is Joshua Gray, who announced last week that he will return 100% to Oregon State in 2023 as a redshirt junior. And I think that is huge news for the Oregon State offensive line.
Well, and then earlier in the lodge, it was announced that James Rawls was coming back as well. His uncle announced that in the lodge, which between those two, between Joshua Gray on the O-line and James Rawls on the D-line, that has to make any Beaver fan and the coaches so excited, because Joshua Gray just seems to get better each season. This will be his 4th year. 2023 will be his 4th year. He was a gray shirt. And it's funny because I went back to look at something, and when he was recruited, he was a 240-pound lineman. So they had him wait and enroll the next January. But what he has done is remarkable. And then James Rawls, talk about a guy I felt just gets better and better every single week this season. I'm excited. I feel he's just barely touching the tip of the iceberg of what he can do.
Yeah, these are 2 key returnees in the trenches next year. Oregon State, I think, frankly, dominated in the trenches this year. And the more of those guys you can bring back in 23, the better, particularly on the offensive line, because you're going to lose Brandon Kepper, who is out of eligibility. But the fact that Oregon State is likely going to return 4 of its 5 starters there, I think, is absolutely huge.
Yeah. And we're still waiting. Katana Ladapo has eligibility. Alex Austin, Omar Spates. There's a whole slew of guys that have not made their decision. I get a gut feeling Catan may be looking to leave because it sounds like he's getting some good feedback from NFL, but we don't know. He has not tipped his hand one way or the other. So all those guys will be waiting to see after the bowl game in those weeks after kind of around between Christmas and New Year's what their decision is.
Omar Spates is another one that comes to mind who could leave if he wanted, but I think has something to gain from coming back. And, the fact that he hasn't announced anything yet, wait and see on that one.
Wait and see. Yeah, there's a slew of them. So no shortage of interesting topics over the next month or so. And then we talk about transfer portal. Oregon State really hasn't lost many. So walk-on QB Jake Blair entered. That was more recent, I believe.
That was in August.
Okay. I never saw him on the sideline, and he wasn't there for more than a year. So Ron Harge, DB out of Florida, entered the portal midseason. And then the most recent was a week or 2 ago with Chance Nolan, which was not unexpected.
Yeah, Ron Harge III played in 3 games this season, logged about 5 tackles, and then decided to enter the portal. The key there being he played in 3 games, so he was able to maintain that redshirt year, and then he can go and gain an extra year of eligibility elsewhere. Wishing for the best for Ron Harge, who entered the portal. I believe that was back in October. And then Chance Nolan, of course, the big one there. Oregon State only has 3 guys in the portal, and really only one of them was a starter, and that's Chance Nolan. Anytime a guy who started a lot of games for you at quarterback enters the portal, it's going to be noteworthy. Curious to see where he ends up, and curious to see how Oregon State attacks the quarterback position with him off the roster now. Of course, he joins Tristan Gebbia, who is out of eligibility. Now Oregon State, before Aiden Childs gets here in January, only has 2 scholarship guys at the quarterback position, and they're both freshmen by eligibility. Yeah,
so moving on to the portal discussion. Oregon State has added no one from the portal, but that definitely, if you look at targets, a portal quarterback is like top priority right now for the Beavers.
Yeah, and I'm curious again to see where they go with this, because you've seen like something crazy like 60 to 70, quarterbacks enter the portal already. As we record this on December 13th, there's still a month left in this first transfer portal window. But that Monday of the first, the first day of the transfer portal, when it opened and there were hundreds of players across multiple positions and conferences and levels entering the portal, we were like, okay, like catch the breath, see who's out there, and then we can determine who Oregon State's going to go after. And there are a couple of guys on that list that I think you and I both expect them to pursue pretty hard. Again, we're not going to go into great detail here on the podcast. You can get most of that information in the lodge at BeaverBlitz.
I have the two top guys in the lodge, and some backstory there too. So if you want to know the two top guys that Oregon State is going after in the portal, it's in the lodge.
Yeah. So, yeah, definitely head over there. But what we can say here is that Oregon State is really targeting this quarterback position, as I think you and I both agree, and pretty much everybody in the fan base recognizes that Oregon State has to go out and find somebody that can come in and provide better play at the quarterback position right away. I think I look at that position and I say, maybe you go after a grad transfer or somebody who has 2 years of eligibility. Kind of serves as a bridge to the Aiden Childs era. Maybe somebody who can develop him a little bit as a teammate, because I think you and I both agree Aiden Childs has the potential at least to be Oregon State's quarterback of the future. But getting there is a process, because I don't think we expect him to come in as a 17, 18-year-old and win the starting job right away. And I don't think either of us, frankly, expect Ben Gulbranson to take Oregon State's offense to the next level next year. So, we agree that help is needed pretty direly at the quarterback position.
And I think Oregon State needs to look for a guy that actually has played in college. You can see all the washout guys that were major 4 or 5-star guys that never did much of anything stat-wise in college. So you don't want to just go with some guy that's a sophomore or has never played a snap or has played limited snaps. You need a guy that's actually got some minutes under his belt in the college game, knows the speed of the game, and is ready to come in, take the starting spot right off the bat. And like you said, it allows Aiden Childs to get his legs under him, because I think you and I would agree that he has so much potential and his talent is so raw, but you also don't want to, force that on him if he's not quite ready.
Yeah. Moving away from the quarterback position, there is at least one player who Oregon State has officially offered, and that's offensive lineman Grant Stark, who entered the transfer portal from the University of Nevada. He's an Oregon native, but he has racked up all sorts of Power 5 offers over the last week, and a lot of them in the Pac-12. Curious to see where he ends up. But Angie, is there anything you can provide on Grant Stark and maybe anybody else that Oregon State has officially offered in the portal?
Yeah, and there's a Wyoming guy, and I couldn't find where it's at, but Grant Stark is definitely kind of one of their top non-quarterback guys they're after. In fact, I heard, and I have not been able to confirm this with Grant, but I heard he was on campus this past weekend checking things out. That the biggest thing I think with him is that he's played tackle at Nevada, and Oregon State really needs more help interior. So not that he can't make the move, but that's going to be, where he would need to be, is kind of taking that Kipper spot, or and if he's willing to make that move. But that would be my biggest question mark with him. But definitely a very talented player, all Mountain West starter for the Wolfpack. So definitely one to watch. Like I said, there's a Wyoming player that has an offer. And then there's been a few, there's a lot of guys they're looking at, some cornerbacks, a couple, DBs. I think one guy over on the ACC they're looking at. So they're not leaving stones left unturned in the transfer portal.
And they're looking across multiple positions as well. We fixate, I think, a lot on the quarterback position because it is the most glaring need, and it's the most important position on the field, arguably, for Oregon State. But, year in and year out, we see Oregon State take transfers at other positions. And sometimes we're a little surprised, frankly, at the positions they choose to bolster. But looking at the positions I think Oregon State needs to target, and Angie, I'll get your opinion on this as well. I think Oregon State needs the quarterback. I think they need to go out and find a defensive lineman or two / edge rusher, somebody who can help bolster that pass rush, because it was still pretty inefficient this year, even in that more aggressive scheme that we saw under Trent. But sorry, my phone's ringing here. Got a little distracted. The pass rush that we expected to be a little bit more aggressive, we didn't see that come to fruition. I think Oregon State needs help there. And then I also think they need help at receiver, because you're losing Trayshawn Harrison, who's out of eligibility. You're losing Tyjon Lindsey. These are guys who have been staples in your receiving core. And frankly, Oregon State's still undersized at that position. The Beavers have all the speed in the world at receiver, but they don't have anybody that's a little bit more of a bigger body who's ready to step up. And I think they could benefit from finding somebody there.
Oh, completely. I will say that the edge rushers, and we'll talk about this down the way a little bit, but I expect them to go the JUCO route for that. There's a couple names that I guess we can talk now. Nico Taylor is one I'm watching out of Hutchinson JC in Kansas, and Nana and Yanwu, another Kansas junior college player I'm watching. He was just at UTSA this weekend. They brought in Mason White out of Mount Sac this weekend, who is really talented. Took his Oregon State visit this weekend, and then jumped on a flight to Fort Worth to visit TCU. And everything I'm hearing now is TCU maybe locking him up, which, I mean, fourth in the country, playing in the playoffs, it might be hard to compete with that. But they're looking at the JUCO ranks for some of these guys. So instead of portal, you go JUCO. I completely 100% agree with a wide receiver, a bigger bodied wide receiver. The one thing that we see Oregon State do year in and year out with the whole portal is to hold a scholarship or two back, because if a jelly donut opens up somewhere in the line in the transfer portal, they want to have a scholarship to offer them. Yeah,
and we've seen that really ever since they started using the transfer portal at a high rate. Back in 18 and 19 when it was first kind of opening up. Another position that I think you'll see Oregon State look at, like we just talked about with them offering Grant Stark, is the offensive line. Mm-hmm. We always talk about the offensive line as being a huge strength for Oregon State. Personnel not really usually an issue there. Yet regardless, Jim Maholichek, Jonathan Smith, always looking for offensive line help, and usually from a depth and development perspective, they'll go and find, more of the quote unquote project types who can come in and develop for a year or two. So I think you'll continue to see that kind of on an annual basis.
They took Kipper, was a portal guy. Marco Brewer came from the JUCO ranks. So they do that as well.
I also wouldn't be shocked if Oregon State, if the opportunity arose and if there was a good fit there, I think you would see them potentially take another defensive back, because it's an older group. It's going to be moving on. You're going to see guys like Jaden Grant and Rajon Wright move on this year. A couple of more veterans will leave next year. So I think if you want to get ahead of that, you start looking at talent right away. And then linebacker, particularly on the outside, but even on the inside, I think
I actually think if Oregon State help. If Oregon State's going to take a linebacker, it's going to be middle linebacker. Yeah. And I'll leave it at that. But there are a couple names out there that have intrigued me that I'm watching closely.
That is the transfer portal as it relates to Oregon State. Another key point of recruiting that I think sometimes we can forget now that the transfer portal is so huge and we're in this window. Oh yeah, we have early signing day in a week. This is it's a huge one for Oregon State. There's no way around it. 18 commits as it currently stands. In the 24/7 sports rankings, Oregon State is ranked 44th nationally and 6th in the Pac-12, making it Jonathan Smith's best class and Oregon State's highest ranked class since 2012, which was also 44th nationally and highlighted by Isaac Seumalo, who was one of the top commits in the country. Obviously, these rankings will continue to change and fluctuate as guys commit, decommit from Oregon State and other schools around the country over the next week and into the quote unquote original signing day later in the winter. But Angie, I look at this list and I looked at it before we hopped on here as I kind of refreshed myself. It's pretty remarkable just the progress Oregon State has made recruiting high schoolers. We're now seeing an average player rating of 86.36. Again, one of the highest marks we've seen from Oregon State in a decade. 2 4-stars, 16 3-stars. Those being the first 4-star recruits in the 24/7 Sports composite rating of the Jonathan Smith era, Aiden Childs and Kelsey Howard.
Yeah, and I really want to highlight that average player ranking of 86 because we've talked about for years that, Oregon State is not the team that is going to be like Oregon and getting, 5 stars and the rest 4 stars. Oregon State needs to get those mid to high ranked 3-star guys that they can develop and who want to be on campus, who want to be and get better and be coached up. And that's what they're doing. They've gotten, better and better. But those 2 guys, just today, Aiden Childs was re-ranked 11th best quarterback in the country. Kelsey Howard got bumped up a little bit as well.
Yeah, he's now the 24th best defensive lineman in the country.
So these are guys so those 2, Kelsey Howard could, come in and play immediately, potentially, depending on how big he is. But, he joined some of the guys from last year's class. Malachi Donaldson comes to mind. And, some of those defensive players that have redshirted. Quincy Wright is another D lineman that
Melvin Jordan.
So they're taking those steps, the incremental steps they're building. But I do think that 86 average player rating, because that is a mid to high level 3-star right there. So that means
which used to be the ceiling for Oregon.
Well, it used to be the ceiling. You're absolutely right, Carter. And that what that means is that these guys have more than just Mountain West or Big Sky offers. These guys are guys at other Pac-12 schools. Now, the other thing to keep in mind is this early bowl game has really crimped Oregon State's closing out of this class, because this would be the week that the coaches would be on the road finishing up their in-home visits. They had to cram all of those home visits last week to get into homes. That meant flying to Florida. It meant flying to Kansas. They were all over the country. Typically, then they'd be going back this week to, and I don't want to say babysit, but to keep poachers out. You want your coaches rotating in and staying in front of those guys so they don't get swayed. Oregon State can't, because they're in Vegas preparing for their bowl game. The other thing that this early bowl game has done is this coming weekend, the weekend that we play the bowl game, is the last open weekend for visits before signing day and until January 3rd. We go into dead period right after this weekend. So no visits on any college campus can occur, which makes, some of these portal guys, it makes them tough, because you might have to wait till after Christmas to get them on campus to check things out. So it's not ideal. That's one of the non-ideal things. But I do think in reaching out, so the past couple of days have been super busy from my end, reaching out to the commits, reaching out to coaches to find out, kind of get more insight on these young men that are joining Oregon State. And I can say you guys are going to be really excited when you get to know these guys.
There is one commit that we are kind of projecting to flip, and that is tight end prospect Dorian Thomas out of Washington. Correct me if I'm wrong. I think he's in the Seattle area. But we've seen him kind of narrow his decision to Arizona and Oregon State, and that's after he committed to Oregon State. So I think, a looser commitment to a non-committal there from Dorian Thomas, but the flips and the decommits have been few and far between at Oregon State, and even without Dorian Thomas, this is still an impressive class nonetheless. Yeah.
So heading into this last week, so we are, just 8 days away from signing day. And it has become the big signing day, because now in February, that typically Oregon State will have most of its scholarship class filled. So that February signing day will be walk-ons. That is where they don't sign walk-ons, but they can announce walk-on additions. So this is the big recruiting signing day for Oregon State. Yes, I do believe Dorian Thomas will be flipping to Arizona. You never want to see guys flip, but at the same time, I love what I see from Cooper Jensen. Oregon State did have 2 tight ends in this class, and Cooper Jensen has been 100% solid all along. So, I spoke to a Beaver fan the other day about this, and he's kind of bummed about it. And I said, well, I get it, but you want guys that want to be in your program too. You don't want to have them second guessing. So if he doesn't want to be at Oregon State, then, and you never know what'll happen now with the portal. Maybe he changes his mind later. I do still see at least 1, maybe up to 3 commitments in the next week. So stay tuned on that.
Angie just answered like half of the damn questions that came into the lodge today. But we're going to use that as a transition into that segment, as we only have a few minutes left anyways. But if you asked any question about, the volume of guys who are going to be committing / signing, some of the targets, Angie just answered like half of those questions right there.
I am going to bring up one because this was in the lodge, but this is okay to talk about here on the podcast. Leonard Ayu, which is the commitment out of Kahuku in Hawaii, just committed. Was Friday? I think it was Friday. It was Friday because I was in Corvallis when that broke. He is actually a mission. He'll be taking his 2-year mission before arriving in Corvallis. So he technically won't be signing anything binding. It's a ceremonial signing for him. So he does not count in the scholarship numbers. But I just want to let you guys know that.
Wealth of knowledge right there from Angie Machado. All right. Let's move to the damn questions that we haven't answered here, and we only have a couple of minutes to do so.
Okay.
But this is, again, a reminder. If you're not a member at BeaverBlitz.com, head to the lodge. We like to post our damn questions thread the day that we record the podcast, and it's the best way to get your question answered here on the podcast. We default to the lodge before we go to Twitter, and we start here with a question about NIL collectives and, obviously NIL being a big part of recruiting the transfer portal. Matt Chiafoni asks kind of a bigger picture question about the current setup of the portal and NIL system being sustainable as it's currently constructed. I feel like that is more of a macro level question, but I do want to talk NIL here with a question from Shaka from 503, who asks, do we even know or have a clue how much NIL money our collectives have now? And I think that's an important question to answer. And shout out to Shaka from 503 for that being their first post in the lodge. What Oregon State's NIL collectives have been able to do as we enter this first transfer portal window. Angie, what do you know, and what are your thoughts on how those collectives have, I guess, quote unquote, performed thus far?
Yeah, you know what? I wish I have a number for you guys. I don't. I've heard some rumors that there's the 2 that I know of, Giant Killer Collective, which is basically funding baseball and football student athletes to keep them on campus and, get them into some partnerships that way. And then the Damn Nation, which is a newer one, just kind of came out that they're advertising everywhere. I've heard they're doing very well. The thing with Oregon State is I do know that they are planning to use that money to pay, or not to pay. They can't pay, but they're using collectives to help retain players that are on the roster instead of going out to, and this is true for both of them. They're not looking so much as to go out to buy players.
Which I think is important, because
I think it's so important because it can create huge locker room divisions.
Right.
When you have a true freshman who's never set foot on campus coming in saying, why, I signed a X, Y, Z deal. And then you have some guy that's been working his tail off for years saying,
Brian Miller in the YouTube chat.
Hello.
Shaka from 503 is Brian Miller in the YouTube chat. Brian, welcome to Beaver Blitz, and thank you for contributing your first post in the lodge. It's a great question.
So I wish I had like concrete numbers, and I have a feeling we won't get concrete numbers, like really legit numbers, but Oregon State is catching up quickly. I've been pretty critical that they've been behind. They're catching up, and guys are getting taken care of. And getting more important than just quote getting taken care of is the fact that when I say that, it's not just bags of cash being left on their doorstep. It is getting them in introductions and getting them with businesses that they can either represent or that potentially could be a job for them. So it's that whole package. It's not just bags of cash, which Deion Sanders had seriously the funniest quote the other day, that he doesn't chase the bags chase him. That's going to be the next soundbite, is Neon Deion in the Pac-12.
Deion, I'm just so excited to see what he brings to Colorado. Since we are running low on time, we've got to move on to the next question here, and it's it's the highest upvoted question that we received in the lodge this week. So we have to touch on Mr. G. Gray's question: is Thomas Co a good fit for Trent Bray's defense, or should he transition back to the offensive line? Co, of course, being one of the biggest players on Oregon State's roster by size and who started on the offensive line, transitioned to defensive line, and I think got a lot of Oregon State fans and even us a little bit as well excited about what he can provide at that position of need. Angie, your thoughts on Co's fit on the defensive side?
That's a great question because I feel horrible saying this, but I kind of have forgotten about him this season, Thomas Co. He is the strongest guy on the team, I've been told. He can lift the most weight. He's the strongest. I think the answer to this question depends on how well a guy like Quincy Wright comes along, how well a new guy like Thomas Collins out of Sweden comes in at that defensive tackle position. But I wouldn't be opposed to moving him back over if he has quick enough feet and the right technique. I wouldn't be opposed to seeing him back on the O-line.
We just hit the 1 hour mark, so we do have to get out of here, but we'll leave with one more question because multiple people in the lodge asked about the wide receiver position. We start with Ellis Thomas. Again, first post, welcome to the lodge.
Welcome.
Do you think our young wide receivers who have a little more size are ready to step up? Points to Jimmy Volson III, Micaiah Tongue, Jeremiah Noga, John Dunmore. And then I guess the second part of the question there coming from Canapan, what are the chances we get Isaiah Hodgins 2.0 so I don't have to constantly read about how we don't have any receivers worth a crap? A two-parter for you there, Angie, because I think it goes hand in hand. The personnel that Oregon State already has versus the personnel Oregon State might need to go get from the portal or from recruiting the high school ranks over the next year or two.
Yeah, they have 4 receivers committed right now. So that's and they're in the 6 feet to 6'2" range. Okay, this is my thing. Ben Goldbranson, Chance Nolan, they all got the brunt of the problems with the offense. While they are not world beaters and elite, like crazy, Caleb Williams, elite quarterbacks, all the blame on the offensive struggles cannot be placed just on the quarterback position.
Completely
and I will
agree.
It goes back to quarterback as well, or wide receiver. And Carter, you and I talked about this fall camp, that one of our biggest concerns, it wasn't even quarterback, it was just the inconsistency at wide receiver. And we saw that all year long, whether that was drops, whether that was routes that were ran incorrectly. So it was a two-headed monster, I think, that really kind of hamstrung Oregon State. Not great quarterback play and not great wide receiver play. I would love to see more. I mean, I don't think I've seen enough from a guy like Valson or Dunmore. Micaiah Tongue, I love what he does in the blocking game. He drops the ball. I think that guy needs to go out and just spend 2 hours a day with the jugs machine and, just work on that concentration, because I think he could be a force. But I'm with you. I think some of these young guys, receivers is a position that you don't necessarily need to be in the program for a long time either. You can come in and make an impact. But I'll tell you, Noga, the walk-on, Jeremiah Noga out of Grants Pass area, he impressed me this year the few times we saw him. I also want to see a little more, I think, from that tight end game. I think a guy like Jack Velling is a tight end, but he's kind of that Stanford hybrid wide receiver too. So maybe get a few more of those guys in the system.
Completely agree. That is all the time we have on this episode of the Damn Podcast. We apologize if we didn't get around to asking your question, but I think we answered quite a few of them throughout the course of the episode. So I didn't save as much time at the end as we may have needed. But be sure to keep throwing questions at us. We will be back to record another episode after the bowl game. Angie and I are heading to the airport in exactly 24 hours from now. We're heading down to Las Vegas for the next, 3-4 days to cover the bowl game. We will have coverage of press conferences. We'll be at the Fan Fest. We hope to meet many of you there. And of course, we'll have all sorts of coverage at the game itself at Allegiant Stadium. Angie, looking forward to a great couple of days in Las Vegas, and let's touch base on the Damn Podcast on Sunday or Monday. How does that sound?
Sounds perfect.
Until then, you can follow her at Angie Machado 1 on Twitter. You can follow me at Carter Bahns, and we will talk to you after the bowl game to recap it here on another episode of the Damn Podcast.